Welcome, Roger.
Thank you, Nikki. And so before addressing that topic, I'd like to just express my appreciation for being able again to join this wonderful community. I know many of you from my days when I lived in Orange County, and I'm meeting new people virtually. It felt great to be welcomed back in January and to see the new Tapestry location. And for me, one of the upsides of our global shutdown has been the ability to rejoin the Tapestry community virtually from Seattle. Tapestry is truly a special place, and my years away of absence has really made me appreciate it even more over time. So today I'd like to invite you to join me in thinking about something humans created. I'd like to talk about lines drawn by humans. I'd like to persuade you that my topic today is trivial. It's a topic that I think ought to be trivial, but unfortunately today, these lines have grave consequences. Let me give you an example of the kinds of lines I'm talking about, and I'm going to try to share my screen, which I hope just happened. Now, this is a map of the Middle East in 1910, and if you happen to live there, these border lines would define your nationality and create an expectation for your loyalty. I hope you can see the Ottoman Empire is in purple, with Persia in light blue to the east, Egypt in red to the west. And you might have lived in a home that was set within the borders of the Ottoman Empire for the past few hundred years. If that several hundred years of history gave you a feeling of stability, that was an illusion. Because one day in June 1914, a man from Vienna was driving his car down the streets of Sarajevo, and he took a wrong turn. Because he made that wrong turn, a Serbian anarchist had the opportunity to shoot the Austrian Archduke sitting in the back seat. Within days, the Austrians react by threatening the Serbs and telling them that their friends from Germany would help. The Serbs said they weren't afraid because they were friends with the Russians and the Russians were friends with the French. Both sides appealed to England, and the British decided they didn't like the French that much, but they didn't like the Germans even more. Fast forward 5 years and millions of casualties later, and the map of the Middle East was changed completely. It looked much more like the map you see on the right. Before the war even ended, the French and British started talking about drawing new lines and splitting up the area. They didn't consult with locals or worry much about culture or religion. By the mid-1920s, they created new nations that had never existed in 1914, like Lebanon, Iraq, and Syria. You can see Turkey would appear up where the heart of the Ottoman Empire was. If you lived in the city of Amman, you would wake up one day to learn you lived in a place called Transjordan, which emerged entirely out of the British imagination. Transjordan later became Jordan. Two of the states on the Arabian Peninsula before the war joined to become Saudi Arabia in the 1930s. Israel was created in 1948. And by 1950, the Ottoman Empire was a distant memory. And the map on the right had the only lines that mattered. Now, the Middle East isn't unique in seeing lines being redrawn. Here's what Africa looked like before the Europeans became interested in the continent. And here's what Africa looked like to the right there after the Europeans got to draw their lines. The lines in North America are not immune to change either. Here's what Mexico thought it should look like shortly after it declared independence in 1824. You can see it includes the land where Tapestry sits today. The states we now call California, Utah, and Nevada were part of it. But the descendants of Europeans living on the east coast of North America thought that other lines should work, and they sent men with guns on horseback to persuade Mexico that this much smaller area made more sense. Whoops, excuse me. Now, UUs often talk about creation, and we discuss big issues that involve lots of uncertainty. This is not one of those issues. We know for certain that the lines we've been looking at were drawn by man. They usually have no basis in logic except an occasional geographic feature. They're arbitrary. They don't respect cultures, and even if they did, the cultures would change and intermingle over time. The other thing we know is that these lines are temporary, just like everything else humans create. For those of us who have grown up in the US, we sometimes think of borders as fixed and immutable. You could have grown up in other parts of the world, like the city of Pristina in Eastern Europe, where without leaving your house, you would change your national identity from Yugoslavia to Serbia to Kosovo in a matter of 10 years. But any study of human history shows that over the course of a few hundred years, these lines get moved and erased and redrawn. We're told to forget the old lines and believe the new ones are permanent, until they're not. And that process is not going to stop in 2020. But we're asked by governments to treat these lines as if they're sacred and give our lives to maintain them. We literally build walls and fight wars to keep others from crossing them. We ask our young people to go to battle to preserve these lines. We define ourselves by who was born inside or outside of a borderline. I was born in the US. I didn't earn citizenship here. I didn't work for it. I didn't do anything to deserve it. It just happened by random chance. And yet being born inside these lines has made a huge difference in my life, just as being born outside our borders has made a huge difference in the lives of others. I always like to think about how future generations may judge commonly held attitudes today. Today, not only do many people want to keep others out, it's common discourse that we should try to preserve or enhance the advantages of being born inside our borders. We should keep jobs from moving from our side of the line to their side of the line. We want goods to be purchased from our side of the line, not their side of the line. When a scarce good becomes available, we want people born on our side of the line to get it first. I fear we're going to soon see that contest in action. While we're all hoping for a vaccine for COVID-19, nations are already fighting over who will get the first doses. And border lines will be a huge determinant of who is protected when. Few politicians are ever faulted for advocating that those within their borders should get priority for vaccines, scarce goods, or jobs. I want to compare those common attitudes to our UU principles. Our first principle is to respect the inherent worth and dignity of each person. That principle is not qualified in any way, and it respects no lines or borders. We also have a sixth principle, which is the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. When I read that sixth principle recently, I almost wondered why it was necessary. It seems self-evident, like a corollary of the first principle. If each person has worth and dignity, how could it possibly matter where the person was born or where they live? Still, I was glad there was an explicit statement that our faith respects all persons in all places. Well, thinking about those principles, I also asked myself how different they were from the pride we take in America. If I asked most people to stop and think about their pride in America, I doubt very many of them would say they're really proud that San Diego's on our side of the line and Tijuana's on their side of the line. I think it would be much more common for people to talk about the founding of a nation with the declaration that all humans are created equal. And I know I'm giving our founders the benefit of the doubt by saying all humans are created equal. They really meant men, not all humans. They didn't include indigenous people, they didn't include the enslaved, and they did not include women. That declaration was more aspirational than a statement of reality. But still, I think the pride most people take in America is that over the course of history, the nation has tried to bring that aspiration closer to reality, even if it took longer than it should, even if we've had too many setbacks, and even if we haven't gotten there yet. But there's one way in which I'm not giving the founders any benefit of the doubt, and it's that their declaration was not limited by national boundaries. That's the part I want to focus upon today. Of course, it couldn't be limited to nations, because on July 3rd, 1776, those founders were British subjects. The United States didn't even exist. So the principle had to apply to all people, no matter where they lived, regardless of border lines or national residence. And any government that failed to respect that principle was not legitimate. That's what justified independence. And when you think about it, that aspirational principle about equality and basic rights conferred in the Declaration of Independence is not that far off from the first UU principle. If all humans are created equal and any human has worth and dignity, doesn't that mean that every person has worth and dignity? And if each person has worth and dignity, as in the first UU principle, doesn't the belief in the sixth principle almost follow as a corollary? Can you really say that you embrace the vision in the Declaration of Independence, that vision of equality, and simultaneously seek to deprive others outside of our national boundaries of rights and hopes for prosperity? I don't see how you can. For me, just as our sixth principle seems self-evident from our first, I don't see how you can support the aspirational statement of equality and rights in the Declaration of Independence without also supporting the cause of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for those who live beyond our borders. It's a corollary. It's self-evident too. So I started thinking about this topic by thinking that the UU principles conflicted with our current notions of patriotism. But the vision of the United States was not to benefit those inside of our borders at the expense of everyone else. That's not patriotism. That's nationalism or tribalism. The vision of the founders was equality at home, as well as the opportunity for equality and liberty abroad. So why do we place so much importance on the lines humans create? I want to offer a couple ideas. There's a famous biologist named E.O. Wilson who spent his early career studying ants. And he observed that highly social species evolve not only based upon individual traits, but upon group behavior. The species that have become the most successful on this planet have learned to operate in social groups. That includes ants, and there are trillions of ants, and that includes humans, and there are billions of humans. E.O. Wilson's study of social behavior in ants led him to realize that as a matter of evolution, humans also love to operate in groups. A group provides a secure nest, a home, belonging, security, and joy. Sometimes we just create groups and pick sides. And you can see a great documentary about him where he explains this phenomenon through the example of an Alabama-Auburn football game, which is known as the Iron Bowl. And if I can share again. So here you can see young men who've picked sides and they fight over territory. They do so with the encouragement of attractive young women. And if you can recall what things were like in what we call normal times, with an enthusiastic fan base. And I'm not making fun of anyone. I love this stuff too. And here's a picture of me with my son in 2013 at another Iron Bowl game. We love to create groups. It's in our DNA. And we love to compete. It's a big part of the reason that humans have succeeded as a species so far. But we have to keep in mind that the flip side of inclusion is exclusion. Nationalism and tribalism can lead to brutal exclusion. Those on the other side can become targets. We've seen nations pursue a Holocaust and genocide. Nations deport longtime residents based upon an accident at birth, separate families, and put children in cages. Leaders of one group can choose to define success not by the advancement of individuals within their own group, but by driving those who are excluded into discomfort, poverty, or even death, as if the suffering of others will somehow improve the lot of the dissatisfied at home. As much as supporting a group or nation may have helped humans compete and evolve and thrive over the years as a species, we're now at the point where that same trait has become a threat to our very existence. 200 years ago, a war might have wiped out thousands or even millions of people, but it was in no way a threat to our species. This week is the 75th anniversary of the use of nuclear weapons in Japan. 9 nations possess nuclear weapons today, and that certainly poses a threat to our survival as a species. After 75 years of avoiding further use of these weapons in war, it might give us a feeling of stability and make it feel like the risks are low. But if we continue down the road where everyone outside of our lines is seen as an enemy, even a small act can lead to conflict. You never know when another driver is going to make a wrong turn down a street in Sarajevo. Increasingly, we face threats that require global cooperation. Climate change and disease control are good examples. Nations competing against each other to grow their economies might gain short-term advantages by using cheap energy sources that will accelerate climate change. If each player thinks climate change is the responsibility of the other guy, no one's going to win this competition. There's a story that the scientists working on the atomic bomb during the Manhattan Project enjoyed spending their time talking about the universe. And they thought, when you consider the number of sun-like stars, habitable Earth-like planets, and a conservative assumption about life developing on those planets, there should be thousands of civilizations able to communicate to us by radio. And we're told at one point that Enrico Fermi interrupted this discussion and said, "So where is everybody?" Well, we don't know, but you can imagine that the scientists creating the weapon that could destroy civilization might have wondered if we humans were the first to encounter this problem. We're now at the point where we have to learn to cooperate globally to survive as a species. Now, these are big problems for individuals to tackle, and I'm not suggesting there's anything any one of us can do to easily solve this problem overnight. But just as seemingly minor events can lead us to conflict, I believe the weight of multiple actions by individuals and small groups can set examples that can cause global change. Every step matters. Public efforts to reach out to those on other sides of our lines can make a difference and set a tone. On a national level, we have to be advocates not only for people inside of our borders, but for people outside these lines. Here at Tapestry, the efforts to support and bring dignity to the life of detainees is an excellent example of how we can contribute. Work for climate change is necessarily an international initiative. Efforts to reach out to those from other cultures, host foreign exchange students, and seek out cultural exchanges while traveling and at home can make a difference. We can include international organizations in our giving and volunteer efforts. On an international level, we can remember times in American history when we have understood well that we don't hurt ourselves by helping others beyond our borders. Think of the success of the Marshall Plan for Europe after World War II, or the Peace Corps, or US aid to nations fighting diseases like Ebola. Sometimes we're better off inside our borders when we try to make things better outside of our borders. Then on a more personal level, it turns out that it's not just European intellectuals who draw lines. We all do it. We do it in smaller groups, and we do it ourselves. We're not just part of a nation. We humans are maybe part of a state or city, a religion, a sect within a religion, a church. We can be fans of a sports team, a political party, a club, a dysfunctional extended family, or a clique. Some of the groups are meaningful, some are silly. We're born into some groups, we join others. Sometimes we create our own groups, and with every group, there are insiders and outsiders. We have to be mindful of our groups. It's great to be comfortable with a set group of people, but hopefully that set of comfort gives us the strength and ability to reach out to others and to comfort those beyond our groups. So no matter whether we fall into a group, choose one, or create one, we have to be aware that the flip side of the joy we get from inclusion is exclusion. We have to be aware that those outside the lines and the consequences of the exclusion. Sometimes those consequences are obvious, but they can also be subtle. Around the world, we've seen, the obvious as emotions grow out of control at sporting events or riots erupt at stadiums. But we also know that those rejected by a clique can suffer loneliness and silence. Their pain is real, but not easy to see. We're not going to stop drawing lines. Creating groups is in our DNA, but we're also capable of being aware of what we're doing and reaching beyond. In this time of limited physical interaction, we have an opportunity to reconnect with friends lost by the passage of time or a distant transgression. Reaching out to someone beyond our normal circles is a great exercise. There's not much risk in doing it, and that action can be appreciated even more than reaching out to someone in our traditional comfort zone. We can draw comfort from our groups, but also gain the joy of connecting with those beyond on the other side of our lines. Finally, I'm grateful to be part of a religious tradition that at the start of every service asks the question, who is included, and answers everyone, that asks who is excluded and reminds us that the answer is no one. And I'm grateful to be part of a strong community here at Tapestry that's welcoming to all. I will try to use that strength of welcoming spirit in my own life to reach out to others. Namaste, blessed be. Amen. Thank you.